Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day and welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, powered by AJC. Advocacy Anywhere is AJC's digital platform that enables you to engage with AJC's global expertise, content, and advocacy from wherever you are. Today's program is in partnership with AJC's Campus Affairs Department. We are delighted to be joined today by three exceptional and inspiring campus leaders: Julia Jassy, a sophomore at the University of Chicago; Isabel Mogatov, a freshman at Northwestern University and an alumna of AJC's Leaders for Tomorrow program in Atlanta; and Rose Rich, a senior at the University of Southern California. Julia, Isabel, and Rose are here today to discuss the challenges facing Jewish students on campus and how they are fighting back. Holly Huffnagel, AJC's U.S. Director for Combating Anti-Semitism, will be moderating today's discussion. After we hear from Holly and our esteemed guests, we will take your questions. You may email your question to questions@ajc.org, that's questions plural, or use the Q&A chat feature in Zoom. With that, Holly, I now turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Daniel. On the eve of the 2-year mark of the Tree of Life synagogue shooting, which was the deadliest anti-Semitic attack in US history, AJC released our State of Anti-Semitism in America report. And for the first time, we captured how American Jews feel about anti-Semitism in the US and what the US general public feels. There are at least 3 noteworthy findings to really set the stage for our conversation today about US college campuses. So the first thing we discovered was that nearly half of US adults, 46%, had either never heard the term anti-Semitism before or had heard the term but didn't know what it meant. Yet that number jumps from 46% of Americans who lack familiarity with the term to 53% when we look at Americans between the ages of 18 and 29. So for the age group which captures the time the majority of students are on campus, 53% are not familiar with the term anti-Semitism. Second, we found that over the past 5 years, 22% of American Jews, so more than 1 in 5, have personally experienced anti-Semitism on a college campus or know someone who has. When you juxtapose that data point with the general lack of knowledge about the term anti-Semitism, this is a real problem. And third and finally, we discovered that young American Jews between the ages of 18 and 29 were more likely to avoid certain places, events, or situations out of concern for their safety or comfort as a Jew. So in 2019, we found that 1 in 4 American Jews of all ages, so 25%, 1 in 4 American Jews of all ages had avoided a certain place, event, or situation because they were Jewish. That number jumped to 31% this year of all American Jews. So we went from 1 in 4 to almost 1 in 3. But when we break down by age demographic, we see that for American Jews between the ages of 18 and 29, that number jumps from 31% to 38%. Almost 1 in 4 young American Jews have avoided certain places out of concern for their safety or comfort as a Jew in the last 5 years. Now, these data points are concerning, and so we wonder the connection to the campus environment. Now, AJC tracks incidents on campus. AJC's Campus Affairs Department, under the leadership of Zev Hurwitz, works with students, faculty, and university administrators. But for many of us, on the outside, we read about what's happening in the news or we hear these statistics, and it's startling because we don't have a clear picture of the bad, but also of the good, of the positive experiences, of the positive stories on campus. So today, we are so privileged to have with us 3 bright, strong Jewish students to help us really go beyond the data and shine a light into their experiences on campus. So Rose, Julia, and Isabel, on behalf of AJC, thank you so much for being with us today and welcome to AJC's Advocacy Anywhere. I want to begin, before we dive into our issues, with each of you just a brief introduction. Would you please introduce yourself, again, where you're going to school, and what's your major or your minor? What are you studying? So Rose, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Julia, and then to Isabel. Rose, please.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Rose. I'm a senior at the University of Southern California here in Los Angeles. I'm doing a double major in sociology and a program called Law, History, and Culture with a dance minor. So quite a mouthful.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you guys so much for having me. It's an honor to be here. My name is Julia Jassy. I am a second-year student at the University of Chicago, and I am studying political science with a focus in international relations.
Hi, my name is Isabel Mogatov. I'm a freshman at Northwestern University. Thank you again for having me today. And I am majoring in journalism.
Thank you, Isabel. Rose, I want to actually direct our first question to you. So this past summer, you made national headlines after being forced to resign from your position on the University of Southern California USC student government. For those on the call who aren't familiar, can you please give a brief overview of exactly what happened?
Sure, and I will try to keep this short because my dad said there's a 5-minute version, 20-minute version, 5-hour version. I'll keep this short for everybody. But do know that there was a lot of moving pieces and a lot of different nuances and complexities and kind of what was happening. But essentially at the end of June, there was allegations that came out about the president of the undergraduate student body, who I had ran with. I was serving as the vice president at the time. And these allegations of microaggressions he had engaged in towards Black students on campus. And these came out on a Friday, I think around 10 o'clock in the morning. And within a few hours, a couple of students had kind of taken it upon themselves to hold a student leader accountable for these alleged microaggressions. And it started to become a big thing. And there were emails and statements going back and forth. And then I was at work this entire day. And then by about 5 o'clock in the evening, there was now also a call for my resignation and my impeachment on the basis of my Zionist identity, and that I made Palestinian students feel uncomfortable and didn't feel safe. And thus I didn't have the charge to represent the student body fully because I alienated a certain population with this belief. And by that night, very quickly, a strand of just messages on Instagram and comments started coming in that were all pretty upsetting and pretty disappointing to see coming from your fellow students. I went off social media, but this continued for quite a long time. And about 5 or 6 days after this began, there was an official impeachment filed with our Speaker of the Senate, who is the person who would oversee this process. It was very surprising to see that happen because in our bylaws, we have an obligation for the professional staff who oversee the student government to kind of look at these claims and to see if they really warrant an impeachment trial. And through my discussions I've been having with our Speaker of the Senate and also the professional staff, it had seen, weren't sure about the president, but for me, because they knew where these claims are coming from and where this whole thing began was an attack on an identity and not actually based on any factual reasons or anything that could actually warrant an impeachment trial. But what happened is essentially the professional staff kind of bystepped their bylaw obligation and decided, let's let the Senate decide, student body autonomy, yada, yada, yada. And both of the claims went through. And so an impeachment trial technically began, which is a 2-week period. And however, I think within a week into that, it was early in July at this point, the president did resign from his position. So he did not undergo the full impeachment trial. And then essentially what happened is within a couple of days after that, after numerous conversations with leadership within the USC leadership within the senior administration, which I was lucky to have a relationship with because of my time as vice president, eventually there was an intervention and a shutdown of the impeachment trial on the basis that there wasn't sufficient bylaw processes to run a proper impeachment trial. So the impeachment trial did end, but essentially through this entire time, there were still things happening and multiple things moving at once. My entire cabinet also made the decision to want to step down as well. And about a month after all this happened on August, I think it was August 5th, I made the decision as well to resign and release that letter. And now here I am.
I want to just one minute on this. I thank you for sharing that. I didn't know the full details, and it's really disheartening, Rose, and just thank you for your courage to stand up. What was the reaction to your resignation letter? Did the student body, did they speak out against anti-Semitism? Quickly, what happened?
It was definitely mixed.
Okay.
I think from the Jewish community, there was a lot of people really grateful that this issue was kind of being discussed about on our college campus. And at USC, I think it's really important to note that this isn't an issue on our college campus. My entire time here, there's always one or two things a year, but it's always very civil. Like, everyone respects the right that they have a right to be here on our college campus. So this was really the first time that there'd been something so blatantly anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic that had happened, and something so targeted as well. But I will say there was definitely, I think, a lot of students who kind of came out of the woodwork, so to say, and posting that all the Zionist students deserve to be cyberbullied, and sending messages saying like not very kind things about my decision or about resigning and so forth, and or expressing their joy in me resigning. But you can't make everyone happy, but the community that mattered the most to me, which was the Jewish community and my friends and the people who were all very incredibly supportive. And I was very, very grateful for that, because it was not an easy choice. And I knew it could go a lot of different ways.
Thank you for sharing. And AJC is a proud supporter of what you're doing at USC. Now, Julia, I want to turn to you now. You and several other Jewish students have actually created an Instagram account called Jewish on Campus. Can you just tell us a little bit about this Instagram account? When did you create it? Why did you create it? And what is it doing?
Yeah, for sure. So my experience with Jewish activism is really unique, I think, because I didn't really grow up being a part of it. I grew up on Long Island, New York. I talk about this all the time. It's a place with a lot of Jews. And so I didn't feel the need to justify my identity as a second generation Israeli American, my connection to Israel, my connection to being Jewish. Until I got to college, and like every other student here and every other student in the country right now, I'm experiencing this push to defend my identity. And myself and a few other Jewish students started as an Instagram account, basically meant to amplify the voices of Jewish students, to not only share their stories, but to tell them it was okay to share their stories. And since then, we've really expanded from there. We've worked with organizations like the AJC, and we've realized that we have this role and this obligation as Jewish students who have this platform to continue this motion toward being vocal. We're working to become an organization now, and working with multiple students from around the country to create reports on what is going on in their universities and find processes and how to address these systemic issues occurring on their campus. And I think what's important about Jewish on Campus is that we are all students. We are all college students, undergraduate, even we have graduate students who work with us. And that was intentional, and it continues to be intentional. We are living in this world where our experience on campus is distinct, where we do have to, unfortunately, defend our identities as Jewish students, and especially if we have connections to Israel in any capacity, like the story that Rose outlined, we have to defend that. We have to explain ourselves for that. I've experienced it both in the classroom and online, as I'm sure the rest of the students watching this panel or participating in this panel have as well. So we see ourselves filling this role of being students who are telling other students that it is okay and it is more than justified. It is something to take pride in. It is something you don't have to explain unless you want to explain. That when you do want to speak out against it, you can speak out against it with pride in who you are. And this is a platform that we are really proud of, and we hope we've been so grateful and honored to see a positive response from the community. And we want to continue filling this role of giving students a place to feel like their voices are heard and appreciated and valued.
Thank you, Julia. I actually looked up it last night, and you have thousands and thousands of followers. I think it's just so incredible, the voices that you're sharing for Jewish students as a resource, but also non-Jews. for them to begin to learn what is anti-Semitism and what it looks like today. So thank you for sharing. And I think we'll come back to this Instagram platform a little bit later in our conversation. But Isabel, I want to quickly turn to you now. Just a few weeks ago, so this is like very recent, you were bullied and harassed on social media after speaking out against anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. It had crept into Northwestern community, the Not Cops protest. For those who do not know, Isabel, could provide like a general overview? What happened?
Of course. Our president, Morton Shapiro, is Jewish, and there were widespread protests to remove police presence from campus, and he declined to do so. And so after he declined to do so, his house was surrounded by protesters. I believe I mentioned that he is Jewish. If I haven't, he is Jewish. And they chanted things like Piggy Morty, which could be interpreted as anti-Semitic. And so this self-proclaimed abolitionist movement, Northwestern Community Not Cops, from which most of the protesters belonged, said that they stand against anti-Semitism and that those comments have had no anti-Semitic intent. And they said this in a press release. And yet in that same press release, they said, and this is a quote, "False claims of anti-Semitism have been used throughout Northwestern's history to shut down student activists, especially Palestinian activists, and to divide coalitions by falsely claiming that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism," end quote. So in response, I posted on my personal Instagram on my story saying that, quote, "Zionism is simply the Jewish right to self-determination. Both Palestinians and Israelis should be able to enjoy self-determination in their ethnic homelands. 95 to 97% of Jews are Zionists. Include us in your activism or you're ignoring our voices," end quote. And then I tagged the Northwestern Community Not Cops Instagram account. Within minutes, my Instagram handle was posted on the Northwestern Community Not Cops Instagram without my consent. And my direct messages on Instagram were flooded with hate messages from their followers. My roommate, who is Jewish and posted something similar on her Instagram, was called a Nazi colonizer. And when I reached out to the Northwestern Community Not Cops Instagram account, asking for dialogue, which was the very same thing that they surrounded our president's house demanding, they told me to, quote, "save my breath." And so that was a bit discouraging. Luckily, the Northwestern Jewish community really had my back. I had allies of all faiths, not just Jewish allies or Jews standing up for me. AJC, especially AJC Atlanta, of course, came to my aid. And actually, Julia's platform, Jewish on Campus, helped post some content that some of my friends from Northwestern created.
Thank you for sharing, and I'm hoping it's the beginning of some good things coming out of this unfortunate event. Now, we know from the report that AJC just released, we know that 85% of American Jews believe that the statement "Israel has no right to exist," which is a key tenet of anti-Zionism, is anti-Semitic. 85% of American Jews said that. That wasn't surprising. But I think what was surprising for us, and in a positive way, was that 74%, so 3/4 of US adults, also agreed that saying that Israel has no right to exist is anti-Semitic. But I'm wondering if that's the feeling that you have on campus, that the majority, at least 3/4 of non-Jewish students, think that saying Israel has no right to exist is anti-Semitism. So Isabel, I'll stick with you just a little bit longer. In your opinion, how would you say students perceive anti-Zionism? And have you and your friends discussed strategies for combating this rhetoric on campus?
I think we would perceive those who hold anti-Zionist views as a minority, but a growing minority. And I think it's probably a disproportionately larger minority. Northwestern is one of the top 10 most liberal campuses on the United States. So therefore, you're just going to see a lot of anti-Semitism from the left wing. And I think my opinion on how to combat this most is just like open dialogue with those who don't understand, really trying to engage the people who don't understand or don't see eye to eye in open dialogue. I think that's really the best remedy for all.
Well, thank you. Absolutely. Absolutely. And Rose, I just want to actually turn to you as our senior on campus or online. For, what are the long-term effects, would you say, just in the 4 years, you've been a student on campus climate, if anti-Zionism does become normalized, like it isn't seen as anti-Semitism, it becomes normalized on campus. What are some of these long-term effects that you might see?
I think the pretty obvious one is it does create a more hostile environment for Jewish students who identify as Jewish and Zionists, and also for non-Jewish students who identify as Zionists, because I've also met a fair share of those here at USC and on other college campuses as well. So obviously it's not creating a welcoming environment, which is what I think most college campuses are striving to do to create an inclusive environment for all students. I think that's a very just plain and simple one.
No, it's so true. And Julia, just connecting to Rose's and Isabel's analysis of and experience with actually anti-Zionism, are there like positive action items and steps that have come from your Jewish students sharing their stories on your Instagram platform? Like, do you see your platform now being used to combat even not just misperceptions about anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism, but even misperceptions about Zionism? How is your platform being used in this maybe positive way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that we're seeing a lot, especially now with the coronavirus, with so much of our lives being online, is that has positive and negative impacts on our community. On one hand, this idea of an infographic, this idea of a 10-slide infographic being shared to tell the complete story of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict by someone who is only presenting one part of the conversation has led to a normalization of the conversation around anti-Zionism. And so that's something that I've seen a lot. I think that a lot of students post content on their Instagram stories to make it seem like they're socially aware of what's happening, and they virtue signal that Zionism is being perceived in this way that you don't want to associate yourself with. And what Jewish on campus is a direct response to that. We are kind of the counter voice trying to say, if they're going to share their stories against us, we will share our stories of why we are important and why this is important. And if you think about it, 15 years from now, the students who are in college, the ones who are going and getting this education, will be the leaders of our country and of our world. And if we allow for this conversation to be observed by one side, and not be equal and balanced and nuanced, that will be the overwhelming ideology subscribed to by the people who are making the policy for the future. So it's really important and really crucial that we continue to speak up and share our stories. Like both of the panelists before me were saying, sharing your story is extremely important, because the more that you share your story, the more you normalize the conversation around a more complex viewpoint of this. So I think the most positive action item that JOC has taken thus far, and that I try to take as an individual as well, is to normalize the idea that we can have these conversations and we should have these conversations.
That's so true. And in fact, I almost want to go back to your story, because I realized I didn't ask this in detail when I first asked you about the platform. When did you actually create this platform? Was it just you? And did you have an experience? Like, was something happened to you actually as a Israeli American, or just really bridging that divide that made you want to start this project?
Yeah, so we started this project about 5 months ago. It's been kind of a whirlwind of change. Yeah, especially with kind of school starting and all the moving pieces of our lives. It's been very, very hectic and exciting and inspiring time. But it began with 6 students, and we kind of expanded from there. There are now 3 of us who lead the organization: myself, Isaac DeCastro, and Francesca Fedorovsky. And we have a team of about 18 students who work with us right now, undergraduate and graduate students entirely. And kind of what inspired me to speak out was, I kind of touched upon this earlier. I grew up in an area that it was pretty normal to have a connection to Israel. There really wasn't a need to explain myself in that capacity. I got to college and I was very uncomfortable with the idea that because I never had to explain myself, I didn't really know how to. And so I got to college and I would see kind of the face someone would make when I said my grandparents were from Israel. I would see the response people would have when I spoke favorably about it or spoke about my experiences in relation to it. And I was really uncomfortable with the fact that I didn't have the experience defending it and didn't really know how to yet. So over the the quarantine coronavirus time period, was being exposed to all of these incredible Jewish activists online, especially with the tremendous increase in anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism we've seen come out this summer. And I was inspired to start sharing my story. And I kind of had these conversations to begin with my friend Isaac, who's one of the co-directors of the account, and he was having conversations with our other friend Francesca, and we came together with 3 other students, and we began this platform, and now the 3 of us are the directors of the organization and are dedicating basically all of our time and efforts into creating this organization where students can and should be heard, which has been the more hatred I faced for it, the more inspired I've been to continue talking about it.
Well, thank you, Julia. And I didn't even realize it was that new. And it's just a testament to your efforts on how well it's already doing and how needed it is. So thank you. My next question is actually going to be for all of you, but it has to do with COVID-19 and the pandemic, but it's also really thinking about the day after, right? So when students come back to campus, when there is, I don't know if there'll there will ever be a complete normal, but when there's more normalcy, the question is like, where do we go from here? You know, how can institutions change to make their campuses and their classrooms safer for Jewish students? And I think I want to give each of you the opportunity to respond. So maybe Isabel, if you could go first, and then Rose, and then Julia, that would be great.
So I think universities need to be strategic in the faculty that they're hiring, making sure they are hiring a balanced faculty, especially in Middle Eastern, North African studies departments. I see that very often. They are not balanced. And that one mentality holds greater weight in that department than another. I also think that we should be encouraging Hillels and Chabads and Jewish student organizations to host more dialogues with Jewish students and other marginalized minority groups. Because if we expect allyship when we are facing anti-Semitism, if we expect allyship from other people, we have to first be able to give it. Yes, that's my answer. Thank you.
Rose, please.
Yeah, I totally agree with Isabel, and I think coalition building and building genuine relationships with other groups on our college campus is really, truly probably one of the most important things we can do, as well as education, because I think at the end of the day, like, a lot of people don't really know what Zionism is, or even what Zionism is, or how, like, the complexities of this conflict that has become so popular to discuss on our college campus. And so I think creating spaces for education about Zionism and anti-Semitism, I think, is a really, really crucial step moving forward. Because I think if you understand now these terms, because I think most people just kind of piggyback off of one another and like, oh, I see that this, Zionism means this, this, and this, and those are all bad things. Okay, then I'm an anti-Zionist. And then you actually have a conversation with somebody and explain to them and define it, what it actually is. I think a lot of people are like, oh, I actually like, oh, that's what that is. Like, okay, that's okay. Like, or that's more digestible in this moment. So I think those are just really important things, and to, spread education and to build those relationships, because we can't just fight, this one form of hate. I think it's very important to fight all types of hate on this college campus, because like I said, these are trying to be inclusive spaces. And I think most college campuses have not been able to do that. And so an opportunity to counter that.
Absolutely. Julia?
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that Rose and Isabel had said. One thing I talk a lot about in this capacity is the idea of the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. The IRA definition is the most widely accepted definition of anti-Semitism, but many universities across the country have either rejected this definition or have failed to accept, or have failed to even posit accepting it. So the IRA definition protects Jewish students and protects the idea of Zionism as well in a way that is nuanced and complex. But because of the differing campus climates across the country, I think that we have to start having conversations with administration and student bodies on how IRA can be implemented in a way that works for your campus. How can IRA play in the conversation with free speech? How can IRA play in the conversation with academic freedom? And that's something that you have to work through with a specific university, because every university is different. Like my university in particular prides itself on this idea of academic freedom. So how IRA could be implemented here might be different than it can be implemented somewhere else. So a lot of this is happening in those conversations. And like Isabel had mentioned, being very cognizant of the biases in the professors which you hire. So you're not just streamlining one way of thinking. This idea of academic freedom has to include freedom from indoctrination, has to include a balanced and equal way of learning.
I'm so glad you said that about the IRA definition. I'm so thankful actually for all of your responses. It's so true. I mean, even in AJC, we work with Hillel International on Black Jewish and Latino Jewish summits. This is partnership and coalition building is so important for our work. And another thing I would be remiss if I didn't mention is that AJC, in part because of these issues and needing to make campus safer for Jewish students, is we've been able to take university leaders across the United States on our project Interchange delegation. So we take them to Israel. And once in Israel, we connect those participants, our US faculty and administration, with Israeli counterparts, discuss best practices, develop bilateral research, talk about exchange programs, and really deal with some of the tough issues that have arisen on campus, such as anti-Semitism and anti-Israel anti-Semitism and issues of anti-Zionism. And it's so important, I think, when faculty are present in Israel on the ground, they can see it for themselves. And I just wish we could do more of that. And hopefully after the pandemic, it's something we'll be able to continue. I have one more question for the three of you, and I know we have a lot of questions coming in from our audience, so I want to make sure that everyone can ask you as well. But I do kind of want to end on like a little bit of a positive note, so if you have something positive to share, but also advice, and I think this is so important. So before we turn it over to our audience, what is a piece of advice that you would give to students dealing with these issues on campus, students on our call, even our high school students who are our Leaders for Tomorrow program, who might be on this call listening, that they're not in college yet, but they will be. And a piece of advice for them, but then also a piece of advice for others on this call who might have, know someone who's a Jewish student. It might be their grandchild, it might be their child. Advice for them sitting on the sidelines and watching, maybe concertedly. What advice would you offer for them as well? And I'll start with Julia, and then Isabel, and then Rose.
So my advice kind of starts in the same place for both, and that place is pride. I think that a lot of the strength that I've drawn in my Jewish identity has been an act of rebellion against the hate that I faced for it. And so for the students who are either in college now or going into college, you have to understand that when you do speak up against anti-Semitism, people will watch. And sometimes those people will send hate your way, but sometimes those people will be others who have been too afraid to speak up yet. I was one of those people who was silent. And since I've begun speaking, I've had other students who were in my position a year ago reach out to me and say, because you've normalized speaking about this. You've made it feel okay for me to speak about this. And when you do begin to speak about it, somebody else is watching and somebody else will be inspired to do that. And so if you're afraid of the hatred you will face, you will also inspire others to react positively. For people who are watching who have children or nieces and nephews and grandchildren who are in universities now or young students, I would encourage you to do the same thing, to spark pride and to encourage pride in your child's Jewish identity. Because the more you understand, I think about this all the time, the history of our people is one of collective persecution. And that's something that can be very demeaning and very hard to swallow. But that also can be one that inspires you to understand the history of resilience that we face as a people, how easy it could have been for our ancestors to have just converted to a different faith or to abandon their Judaism altogether. But they've struggled, and they've had to have struggled for a reason. It's something worth fighting for. And we are just a part of that age-old fight against it.
Thank you so much. Isabel, please.
So I think the best thing that you can do in these types of situations is come at them with an open heart and open mind as a student, and understanding that there is a lot of pain from both sides, and both sides really want to make their college campuses a better place. And so being open and willing to have dialogue, real two-sided dialogue, is what is going to be making a difference. And then advice I would give for the parents, I would just say that as much as it's scary, and grandparents, of course, just family members in general or loved ones, it's scary to watch somebody you love be put in this place where they're facing so much hate. But I think it's a necessary position that Jewish students on campus must take if they feel comfortable doing so. And I've been very lucky to have parents who, as much as they are concerned about my well-being, have allowed me to speak out. And I feel very grateful for that. And in the sense that they know I'm not putting myself in immediate danger. And so in that case, they're willing to let me speak out.
Thank you, Isabel. And Rose, if you wanted to give the final words, that would be wonderful.
I would say to any student who has encountered a situation on the college campus and is looking to speak out, it can be very scary. And I think oftentimes you go into it and there's a lot of fear of loneliness and having to go through this on your own. And I think the most important thing to remember, and I can speak to this from a very personal experience, is there is an incredible community. There's literally an army behind you. If you feel so passionately about speaking out and addressing this issue, who's going to do everything and anything they can to help and support you. And I think that is just such an incredible and amazing thing to remember, because it can be very lonely to kind of be put in this position and you're seeing these things that, are coming at you, on social media, or if we're back in person, live, face to face, and it can be a difficult thing to digest, but there's an amazing group behind you. And I think to all the family members, the friends, the community, I would just say, remember to be there for them and to understand that, this can be a very traumatic or difficult experience for a student to go through. And I think the best thing you can really do is just, and to kind of echo what Julie and Isabel were saying, is just to really be there and just to support them and to offer a space for them to do whatever they need to do to kind of process or get through this moment, because every experience is unique, every campus is different. And I think, as we're seeing with 3 very different experiences up here, is no 2 situations are exactly alike. And so recognizing that and just, letting them get it done.
Yeah. Thank you, Rose, and to all of you. And Daniel, I would actually like to turn the floor over to you now for questions from our audience.
Thank you, Holly. Rose, our first question is for you, and it comes from Dylan Jacobs in Tampa, Florida. What is one thing you wish the university administrators had done differently while you were battling harassment from the student body?
I really wish that this isn't even the administration, these are people charged with overseeing the student government. I wish they had done their duties and the bylaws, because I think this could have been stopped very easily, and it could have been a very, very different situation. And I wish that also there had been, and even more so, and I wish that if the administration, when they realized this didn't happen, stepped in quicker to do something, because I think there were multiple points for this to stop. And unfortunately, it happened a little too slowly. So I'm really grateful for their support and the amazing conversations I got to have with all of them. But I think there was definitely some opportunities to step in quicker.
Thank you. Our next question is actually for all of you, and maybe we'll begin first with you, Isabel, and then Julia, and then you, Rose. This comes from Vicky Kleinman in St. Louis, and I would say it's come from many others as well. Did you anticipate having these challenges in college? So before you left for college, do you anticipate this? And do you feel like you were prepared for these challenges before you started college, or what was missing from that preparation, Isabel?
Yes, I was fortunate enough not only to be a LIFT student, but also to intern for AJC Atlanta for a year. Um, so I did come into this knowing that these were challenges I was going to face. Um, I didn't necessarily think on this online quarter that I would be facing it this quarter, but I am. And I think this is something that AJC's Leaders for Tomorrow program, or LIFT, prepared me very well for. And I encourage young high school Jewish students to do research on this, because I really haven't heard from my friends or personally experienced any anti-Semitism from the right on college campuses. And my friends who have experienced anti-Semitism, and I have, it's really just been from extremist left-wing organizations or people who hold those mentalities, which is not historically the type of anti-Semitism that our parents and grandparents faced. And so I think the best thing that you can do in high school is do research and prepare for this type of stuff, because unfortunately it's happening on college campuses around the country.
Yeah, I touched upon this a bit earlier. I never used to be this vocal. And a lot of it is by nature of where I grew up. There wasn't really a need to be. But when I got to college, I did not expect it. I was not prepared for the gravity of countering a narrative which questions your humanity. I wasn't prepared for it in terms of the emotional toll it would take on you. And I didn't know how to respond. And so I think that, like most things, the key to this is education. But I caution educators to be very conscious of the fact that we don't want to scare students to be disempowered walking into college. We don't want students walking into college being nervous, being afraid of being discriminated against, being afraid of being bullied. We want students to understand and learn these things with pride. And I'm going to come back to this idea of pride. I think pride is very important. Pride is what keeps Jews alive. That's what keeps our people alive. And I think that when we educate young students and we tell them that there are people in the world who hold these beliefs that will question your humanity and question your existence, we have to do it with the notion that we are countering it with love for our people and love for our Judaism, and not out of hate or fear for what we're facing.
I would say, could you repeat the question one more time?
Sure. So it was, did you anticipate having these challenges in college? And like, what was missing, or do you feel like you were prepared before you started college to address these challenges on campus?
So I would say I grew up in an awesome Jewish household and I loved it. But I left home when I was 14. I had a very untraditional high school experience. I was a professional ballet dancer coming to college. So when I walked onto the USC college campus, I was a dance major at the time. I wasn't really looking to get involved in Jewish life or anything. So I was never anticipating having these conversations or really even being in the space to begin with. And once I transitioned out of dance and found this community and really got involved, I would say to those students who, aren't super involved in the Jewish community or maybe don't have a large Jewish community where they are, you can also walk onto your college campus and gain unbelievable tools and gain an unbelievable community. And so that if you do ever have to, God forbid, get to the point where something happens and you need to speak out, you will feel more prepared or more empowered or just more supported in this situation because there are really awesome Hillel directors and Chabad rabbis and other, AJC, other amazing Jewish organizations out there who have all these awesome tools to show you, how to be a Jew on campus, essentially.
Thank you. And Isabel, following up on what you had to say about LIFT, AJC's Leaders for Tomorrow program for high school students, a LIFT student actually who's about to begin LIFT in New York City wrote in, was asking if you had one specific piece of advice that you would give as I embark on my LIFT journey and start thinking about college.
I think the resources that I learned, the materials that I received from LIFT and the knowledge that I learned throughout the LIFT program has been so integral, and my allyship on college campuses. So I would say hold on to the materials that you're given in LIFT. Remember the anecdotes, remember the facts and the statistics, because those are relevant and those will help you bolster your advocacy and make you seem more legitimate when you try to have these dialogues on college campuses.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Maddie Steinberger in Los Angeles. Can you tell us more about the role that social media has played in the anti-Semitism you've experienced personally? How has it manifested? What platforms has it occurred on? And has your administration or have there been social media companies been responsive? And maybe Julia, will begin with you.
Yeah, this is a really important question in a lot of the work that I do. I think you see it coming from two different places. On one hand, you see it from this idea of being lumped in with activism. So activism has taken a huge increase in exposure this summer, and a lot of it has been incredible and inspiring. It has inspired myself and so many other young students from different minority communities to speak up about their stories. However, it is often short-sighted, and I'm going to come back to this idea of virtue signaling being sharing something to prove that you are socially aware without understanding the complexity or implications of what you are sharing. And a lot of the anti-Semitism that has been reported to our organization has come from people thinking that they're being progressive, thinking that they're doing something good for the world, but actually sharing something very harmful. Like, for example, at Harvard, there was a graphic shared by a student organization that had won a Holocaust denial cartoon competition in the past. And that was being shared by an organization thinking that they were being progressive, thinking that they were being socially aware. And a lot of that comes from the normalization of like using these buzzwords, using words like apartheid, using words like ethno-state, using words like racism when talking about Israel, that has led to the ostracization of students who are Jewish and don't condemn the actions of Israel. On the other side of the spectrum, when you use platforms like Twitter, you could just take a look at my Instagram account. I've documented this. There have been so many stories and so many examples of myself and other students being absolutely harassed by hundreds of neo-Nazis on the internet. I've been told some things that I will not repeat because they're just so vulgar and so upsetting. But if you do want to take a look, my Instagram account has these stories documented. And this is just what I've experienced. I've seen many students have this happen to them as well. So you see this coming from two different places. And I think that that comes down to kind of two different solutions. One of them, and I'm going to come back to it again, is this idea of education, is sharing your stories and educating others on your stories and encouraging your university to do the same. Because when only one side of the narrative is being perpetuated, you're allowing for this ignorance and this bigotry to flourish. On the other side, it's social media platforms cracking down, especially platforms like Twitter, cracking down on anti-Semitism that runs rampant and is allowed to flourish on their platforms. You don't know how many times I've had people report to us that they've reported these instances of horrible anti-Semitism and nothing has happened to them. These have been allowed to perpetuate. So these are kind of two action items I would urge to continue.
Great, thank you, Julia. Our next question comes from Reese Hoppenstein, who's a freshman at the University of Indiana. And this is for you, Rose. What is one positive thing to have come out of such a difficult situation?
I think the overwhelmingly positive thing has been kind of touching back to this community and the support, is that I think I've been able to interact and meet with so many incredible individuals like Julia now and Isabel, who are sharing these amazing stories. And I think knowing that there is just such an amazing community has been just so incredibly meaningful throughout this experience, and just knowing that there is such an army, standing behind every Jewish student on campus. And I think also it was a really reaffirming moment actually in my Zionist identity, in my Jewish identity, and knowing that even after things that were said and communicated to me, and some of them just quite disgusting, I still hold this identity very closely to me and recognize the role that it's played in shaping me and my beliefs and who I am as an individual in this world. And so I think that's just been probably the most gratifying thing, is knowing that even in this those intense few months, that I can still walk away and say, I'm Jewish, I wear my Ganavita around my neck, I'm unbelievably proud to be Jewish, and I'm unbelievably proud to be a Zionist still, and will continue to be one for the rest of my life.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Arthur Israel in Chicago, and this is addressed to you, Isabel. What's next for Northwestern? Have you and other Jewish leaders on campus discussed how you will combat this pervasive issue on campus?
I don't know what's next for Northwestern, which is a little bit scary. I also feel as if being kind of thrown into this environment without actually physically being on campus, it's hard to know what student leaders who are a few years older than me are thinking, or where to go from here. But if it were up for me, and I'm going to echo what I said earlier, I really think allyship and intersectionality is so key. And I think often Jews are left out of intersectional spaces. And I think we need to be a part of those conversations. So if it were up to me, I think an increased sense of allyship is where I personally would want to go from here on Northwestern's campus.
Thank you, Isabel. And to follow up on that, I don't know, Julia or Rose, do either of you want to speak about allyship or intersectionality? I know we've been receiving a number of questions or comments, but I think it's an important point if either of you would like to respond as well.
Yeah, Rose, you can go ahead, or I can. Either way, it's fine to me.
Go ahead, Julia.
Yeah, I think that, Isabel, you touched upon a really important point, that we are often left out of the conversation around intersectionality. And I think that comes from misconceptions about what it means to be Jewish. Judaism is a religion, but Judaism is also an identifying characteristic of an ethno-religious group, we're more than just a religion. We have this kind of deeper tie that isn't really normal for most people in like Western society to understand. And you can't really blame them. They haven't been exposed to it. And that's something that I think that growing up, I didn't even fully internalize because I wasn't really aware of it. So we do have this intersectionality to our own identity as well. And when Jews are being addressed and anti-Semitism is being addressed, that has to be kept in mind. Touching upon the idea of allyship, I think that allyship is extremely important for a few reasons. Number one, we are a very small population in this world. And for us to get anywhere, we have to work together with other people. But regardless of that, we should be working together with other people because we're not existing in this monolith. We're not existing as this group outside of society. We are a part of this beautifully diverse world that we want to be included in. And I think that historically, the relationship between Jews and other ethnic and racial minorities, specifically the Black-Jewish relationship, has been so instrumental in the liberation of both of our communities. And that's something we should continue to touch upon and to call for with mutual understanding. And that, again, is going to happen through these conversations, be them difficult.
I could not agree more with what Julie and Isabel just said, but I think just to very quickly jump on with that, I think intersectionality can either be a tool that can be used for goodness and greatness, or it can be quite detrimental depending on the spaces and the way that it's in the way that we do use it as human beings. So I think that, you know, we have four female identifying people up here, and so we all have an intersection now as our identity as women, and we have you know, different things that we identify with that I think are really important to kind of walk into those spaces and say that, hi, you know, I identify personally as queer, so I get to walk into spaces and say, hi, I am a Jewish queer woman, like, nice to meet you all. And I think that's really important to walk in and with both your Jewish identity and all these other identities into different spaces, to make it very, you know, to pull back to the idea of normalization that was brought up earlier, to normalize that we are more than just one thing and that we have a right to be in all these different spaces, and that we care about multiple things beyond just this one identity that people often hold to us very closely and use it as a weapon against us.
Thank you all for that. So we have time for one final question that I want to address to the three of you. And this comes from Abe Baker Butler, a LIFT alumnus in New York, who asks, what gives you hope about the current anti-Semitism situation on campus? So maybe Rose will begin with you, and then Isabel, and then you, Julia, before we turn it back over to Holly.
This is going to make me sound really old, but as a senior and as somebody who is graduating this year and moving on into a different part of the world and a different phase in my life, like, I'm very hopeful and enthusiastic about the fact that we are students like Julia and Isabel who are in this new and upcoming generation, who are being active and vocal and offering so many amazing tools and resources and creating spaces to have these dialogues, and who are trying to create coalitions and allyship and to move forward and to bring, you know, the student Jewish community into the 21st century and to make it a long-term and sustainable thing. And so as somebody leaving, I'm unbelievably excited, and I do feel at ease knowing that there are so many students like these other two lovely ladies up here, because they are, you know, who knows what the next few years are going to hold, and they're going to help be trailblazers like that. And so I feel good knowing that I'm leaving college campus and that there's students like them on it.
I can say for myself personally, what makes me feel good on a college campus is knowing that while the students who sent me hate messages were loud, they are a minority. And it's important to be cognizant that I think they are a growing minority, but they are still a minority. And there are people who agreed really with the who don't see eye to eye with me on issues of Israel and Palestine, and who in fact see the situation from a very opposite point of view, but still recognize that there's a way to disagree without being anti-Semitic, and harshly criticize those who were being anti-Semitic towards me. And so that there can be people who disagree with me and still can be respectful of my opinions. And so on the whole, I think I belong to a very supportive campus community, and I will not let a few hateful people spoil my campus experience.
Yeah, I want to echo what both of you guys said. I think what gives me hope in the situation is community. I think what I've seen with Jewish on campus and seeing with talking and getting to know people like you, Rose, and you, Isabel, is the idea that we aren't in this fight by ourselves, that there are more people who are silently watching and supporting us that are now deciding to be loud, that this sense of gravity around what's happening to our community now is being felt by everyone in our community, that we aren't alone in this fight, that we aren't feeling this as, you know, a fringe occurrence. This is happening for all of us, and we are in this fight together and we all feel it. And this is not the first time that Jews have had to face hatred. This will probably, unfortunately, not be the last time, but we are continuing this legacy of standing proudly for our identity and standing for and with our people. And that's something that gives me a lot of hope and a lot of pride.
Holly, with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Daniel. Rose, Julia, and Isabel, on behalf of AJC, just thank you so much for this illuminating and enriching discussion about campus life and campus activism, and also for your suggestions about resources on anti-Semitism, on anti-Zionism, and what students can do to prepare actually for college. And again, I want to reference AJC's Campus Affairs Department as a resource, and also specifically AJC's online resource on anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, which can be found at ajc.org/for-students. With that, I just want to end with how privileged we are to be working with you. And we wish all of you the best with our strongest support with the remainder of your semester online and hopefully offline soon, and the rest of the school year. So thank you again. And Daniel, I now turn it back to you to formally close our program.
Great. Thank you, Holly. And thank you, Rose, Julia, and Isabel, for sharing your really inspiring stories and experiences as on campus. I'd also like to thank our global audience for joining us today. And for more information about AJC's Campus Affairs Department, please visit ajc.org/campus. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.